And today I wanted to talk about prisons. Prisons, they affect most people, especially those deriving from the Chicano Nation. Everybody knows somebody has a family member, a friend, a partner, an ex, a neighbor, somebody who has been imprisoned. So that's something that everybody can, they can relate to. Prisons is a reality here in the United Snakes. So this is something that prisons is something that's in our lives. It's in our social reality. We experience at all times, and it's something that we need to consider when we're trying to evaluate anything going on in society. We have to understand what prisons are, and what causes, and what what we go through, what our family goes through. Um, so this is something that we have to understand. So in the U.S., prisons is a big problem. There's over 2 million people that are imprisoned. People are on parole, probation, some kind of house home arrest, something. We're talking 2.5 million people. So it's a big problem. That's a lot of people. That's an army. Prisons are mostly filled with lumpen, what's considered the lumpen population. Those who are not in the working class, they are in the underclass, and so prisons. There's a couple of theories out there, and so many organizations that work with prisoners, prisoners' rights movement, prison reform, etc. There's one trend out there that says that prisons are designed, or all of these people that are imprisoned are there in order for financial gain from the state, from the government. And those who promote this theory, they suggest that there is something called a prison industrial complex, a PIC, a prison industrial complex, and that it's almost like they need prisoners here. They want prisoners in order to make money, in order for the government to make money. And that's partly true. There is some money coming out of prisons. There's some, there's some money making ventures, whether that be the telephone companies, whether that be the canteen, the commissary. They make, they price everything exorbitantly, with high prices. People are buying top ramens in there for $1.50 or what have you. So they're making some profits off of prisoners. But in the grand scheme of things, when you look at how much it costs to run prisons, when you look at how much it costs to house prisoners, to feed, and to run prisons in general, the electricity, building prisons is, millions of, you got to build the prisons themselves. Um, then we're not even getting into healthcare. How much does it cost a year to, prisoners are getting sick all the time. There's many elderly prisoners. So when you weigh all that out, the money wise, there is some financial incentive, but I would not say that it does not lead me to believe that the financial incentive is high enough to say that that's the sole purpose of prisons. And so that's one theory. And you'll hear a lot of people, and usually it's people that work in these organizations that work for prisoners' rights, who have not done a lot of studying. They have not done a lot of deep study on why prisons exist, and why is there such a high rate of mass incarceration in the U.S. Why is there so many prisoners, 2 million plus prisoners? Why is that? And they just scratch the surface and say, hey, well, they're profiting, so it's for profit, and there's a PIC, prison industrial complex. I disagree with the PIC. I disagree with those who say that the sole purpose for imprisonment is, for a financial gain. And so I would say, because I like to dig into things very deeply, I like to look to see the inner the reason, the inner core of why anything happens in society. Why is it? There's deep reasons why. And when it comes to prisons, I would say that the primary role of prisons is because of national oppression. National oppression. And we got to look at, what is, who are the people? Let's look at prisons first. Whether we're talking county jails, prisons, control units, federal prisons, state prisons, it doesn't matter. Prisons in the U.S. Let's look at them. Let's look. So who's in prison? Who are the people that are getting incarcerated, imprisoned at higher rates than anybody else? Who is it? Well, when we look to the prison system, we see overwhelmingly it's brown and black folks, right? It's the Chicano Nation and the Black Nation that is imprisoned at higher rates than any other peoples. Right now, for example, in the federal prison system in the U.S., we find that the federal prison system is the majority of the population is raza is raza populated. So if we look at the majority of federal prison systems being raza, um, who is raza within these false U.S. borders? Well, the majority of those found in these false U.S. borders, majority of raza are Chicano people. They're from the Chicano Nation. And there's other raza. There may be Central Americans, South Americans, what have you, Boricuas, what have you. But the majority of raza in these false U.S. borders are Chicano. With that being said, if we look to the federal prison system being majority raza, so majority Chicano prisoners in the federal prison system, we also see that trend growing very strongly in the state prisons. So in the state prisons, we see also a high concentration, and the numbers are growing every day, a browning of the state prison system. So as of right now, it's brown and black, but it's continuing to brown. And so just like the rest of the U.S. population is continuing to brown. And they say in, 10, 20 years, raza are going to be the largest population of people in the U.S. So that's something to understand. If the majority of population is raza, it's probably going to be majority in the prisons. Right now, it's not the case, because right now, the majority of the U.S. population is white. So if the white nation is the majority of the population, if there's hundreds of millions, a couple 100 million white people in the U.S., and yet our prisons are mostly brown and black, we understand that that's due to national oppression. If we also look to the numbers on the drug users in the U.S., the majority of drug users in the U.S. are white folks. So if it's those within the white nation that are the majority of the drug users, and that tells us that there's more brown and black folks in prisons. And it's not because they're committing crimes more than white folks, because the numbers tell us that white folks actually, use the highest numbers of drugs, and that's something we don't hear about in the media. We don't see it on the news. We don't see it on movies. We don't know. So, and that's hidden. And that's because the white ruling class are those in charge of the media. They're the ones that own these corporations that create the news that we see, the movies, the film industry, basically the propaganda arm. And so, that's left out of the conversation. We're not told that. We're also not told that, it would probably surprise most people that the majority of people in US borders on welfare are white. And yet we grow up not knowing that. Like I grew up, from watching TV and movies, etc., thinking majority of people on welfare are brown and black, which is totally BS. It's not the case. But we wouldn't know that because, white media, the corporate media, which is white media, continues to promote the idea that brown and black people are the cause of crime, that are most drug users, that are on welfare, etc. So we grew up thinking, believing this propaganda that you know that it's brown and black people that are causing all this strife, and so it would not, we wouldn't question the fact that there's mostly brown and black people in the prisons, but that's incorrect. So when we look at the prison systems, um, and we look at in this, and that reflects also the courts, or the KKK courts that I like to call them. This is actually, some people, call it the justice system in the US. I like to call it the injustice system in the US. And the injustice system, the courts, is overwhelmingly biased, racist, and we see that because we see who's imprisoned at higher rates, who gets life sentences, and who gets, suspended prison sentences, etc. So going back to the prisons, I would have to say, because it's national oppression that's at the helm of the rise in mass imprisonment, it is national oppression. This is the cause of imprisonment. And why people would say, why is there why is national oppression reflected in mass imprisonment of brown and black folks? Well, this has to do with social control. It's all about social control. You got to remember, we live in a colonized society, where we have the Chicano Nation, the Black Nation, the First Nations. We're colonized people. We're internal colonies within the false U.S. borders. So we are within the oppressor nation, America, and yet we exist as nations. We have no power. We don't have political power, and so we don't have our own governments, etc. So we exist, but we are totally oppressed. We're not in charge of our own resources. We don't have our own military. We don't have our own government. All of these things are signs of a nation that is free and independent. We are not. And so, and this goes again of why I created this channel, Free Aztlan. Free Aztlan is promoting the idea of an independent Aztlan, an independent Chicano nation. This is important. So back to the prisons, it's a form of social control. And so why would they want to control the Chicano nation, the Black nation? Why would they want to control these oppressed nations' people? Well, in any colonized society, there exists the potential, the high potential of resistance. There exists the potential of an uprising. There exists a very good potential of a civil war. And so in the future, in all oppressor nations have always had uprisings and resistance and civil wars. So this is nothing that, this is a fact. It's gonna happen. When it happens, I don't know. We don't know. The people will decide that. But for now, that high probability exists. So how does an oppressor nation, a colonizer, control an oppressed nation's people? How do they control the Chicano nation from rising up, from resisting, from uprising, civil war, etc.? Well, one way they control, and this could be found in any country. When the Philippines were colonized, when North Korea was colonized, when Vietnam was colonized by the French, in any society where there's colonization, um, in Angola and Africa, I mean, anywhere that we can see the oppressor nation, the colonizer, um, they will, um, you know, they will keep the oppressed nations under control. How do they do that? How do they keep the oppressed nations under control? Well, one way they do it is they will hyper police these populations. They hyper police our barrios. They hyper police the hoods, the ghettos, the pet projects. They hyper police them in order to keep our the most rebellious sector of our nation, of the Chicano Nation, the most rebellious sector of Aztlan is our youth. And they do this in order to capture our youth. If you look at and this is a war tactic. This is a war tactic. And this is what I talk about when people don't dig deeply. They don't understand the social reality that we're going through. They're just scratching the surface, and well, there's high crime, so they're just cutting down. No, no, it's very deeper than that. So one of the things is, um, if you look in military terms, um, war age, the age of soldiers, of warriors, um, military age youth, and you could go back to World War I, World War II, the U.S. war on Vietnam, U.S. invasion of Mexico, wherever you want to do, you will find that it was always the youth between the age groups of 15 to 35. Universally, that's known as military age, 15 to 35. These are the forces, these are the social forces that are usually in battle if a war pops off. If it kicks off, these are and there's give or take some earlier, some later, but usually 15 to 35 is war age. And these are the ones that pick up the gun, they pick up the rifle, and these are the ones fighting in any society, whether it's Africa, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Mexico, Vietnam, what have you. 15 to 35 is military age. These are the ones that are being recruited into the military, into the People's Army, to fight the oppressor nation, to fight the invaders. So, because of that, you got to remember everything that they do in this country. They do it. They have think tanks. They have military strategists that think out everything when it comes to law enforcement, so-called law enforcement tactics, and what they do. They're bringing in the think tanks and the different agencies who design these programs for different law enforcement, etc. So it's not a surprise that they are going to hyper police those youth aged 15 to 35 within the Chicano Nation or any other oppressed nations group. They're going to hyper police our community because these are military age people. These are the people that they want to capture, and then they imprison, and that works in a lot of different ways. For one, it deters others from rising up or being rebellious because they know, this is why when we see these videos of police murdering innocent people, unarmed people across these false US borders, we also see that the majority of these people being murdered are military age 15 to 35. So none of this is coincidence. So 15 to 35 is very dangerous to the state, to the oppressor nation. And so they target this group, this population in all the oppressed nations, in all of the internal colonies. And so they imprison us at overwhelming rates. They give us life sentences, 10, 20, 30 years, put us away until we come out after military age. After 35, people are older, they think more, and they just, they probably don't get in a lot. They're probably not as rebellious as they were when they were within military age. So they do this purposely. um, and this is a dangerous age, and it's mostly males, although they are imprisoning females as well, because as we know, females, women hold up half the sky, and and females will pick up a gun when a civil war pops off, just like a male. So they know that, but they mostly focus and target males. So that's something. So these are the things that we have to understand. We have to know that this is what the oppressor nation is up to. This is what they're doing. They're targeting our youth, and they send us to these prisons. And then even within prisons, there's more hyper policing. There's the situation where we're on the main lines, general population, and then they further target our people by targeting leaders, those of influence, those who are politically educated, um, and this is meant, and then they take us off of the general population and place us in control units in the holes and etc. And this is done once again to kind of prevent us from mobilizing our people, from organizing, from inspiring, and from leading the imprisoned masses. And they do this because their goal is to keep imprisoned Aztlan ignorant, with no political direction, um, unconscious. And if they do that, then everything business goes as usual. So that's something that they try to prevent. They prevent us from, mobilizing our communities, organizing, because there's a lot of organizing even in the prisons. So prisons, um, are these are things that these are institutions designed by the white oppressor nation in order to continue to have us in a state of helplessness, where we can't organize and we can't do things, and we're hyper vigilant and we're in survival mode and all of the above. So this is why prisons are designed. This is why when you hear mass imprisonment, you'll know. When you hear there's 2 million people in prison, you know why. This is for social control. This is for national oppression. And they have to have national oppression, because there's an oppressor nation. There's a white oppressor nation that continues to colonize the Chicano Nation, colonize Aztlan, colonize New Africa, and others. And in order to keep us in this state, where they are occupying our land, they have to, they have to imprison, the bulk of us, the most resistant, the most rebellious forces within our nation. So this is what they do, and so when you see the police driving around the barrio, driving around the hood, make no mistake, it's not to make sure everybody's safe. They're doing it because they're on the hunt. They're on the hunt for military age youth, 15 to 35. They're going to see you. They're going to profile you. They're going to pull you over. They're going to put you in their database, put you on their field cards. And this is to lock you in, and they're hunting. They're basically hunting for brown skins in the barrio. So this is what they do. So prisons, once again, are not for anything other than social control and national oppression. And even when we talk about crime, we could talk about crime in the U.S. We can talk about, let's take, for example, the act of murder. Well, the act of murder in the U.S. is not a crime per se. So what I'm saying is, it's not a crime to kill somebody. It's not. It depends on who you kill them for. If you kill them for the U.S. military, if you kill them for the police departments, it's okay. You're going to actually get a medal. You're going to get a letter of commendation. You're going to get a certificate or an award from the mayor of the city. But if you take a life defending your community, defending the people, defending Aztlan, etc., you're going to prison, and you're probably going to death row. So it's not the act itself of murder, it's actually who you murder for. That's why we have people in the military who continue to, murder, serial killers, and they're given medals, and they're given ranks, and etc. Because it's all about who you murder for. If you murder for America, you get a medal. If you defend Aztlan, and in the result of that take a life, you're getting death. So this is a concrete example of colonization, and how even within a colonized society, even crimes, even the idea of crimes, it's not what they say it is. And so, in a revolutionary society, crimes would, the crimes today in the US, this is why many people say that, all prisoners are political prisoners. Because in the US, I would say most prisoners are political prisoners, because there are some people that prey on the people in general, and that's wrong. You can't do certain things preying on the people. That's wrong. But majority of crimes in the US, I would say most prisoners in US prisons are political prisoners, because the laws are political. It's ran by a political system. And this is why it's important when people say, oh, well, I don't get into politics, I'm not, well, when you do that, you're ceding ground for the enemy politics. You're giving up ground. You're surrendering ground to the enemy politics, because there's always going to be politics. And so if you're not involved in politics, and I'm not talking bougie politics, I'm not talking about Republicans and Democrats, I'm talking about revolutionary politics. If you're not involved in revolutionary politics, you're basically giving up the struggle to counter revolutionary politics, to politics that go against the revolution, go against the people, go against Aztlan. So, we have to continue to be conscious of politics. We have to be aware of politics. We have to be very politically conscious, because the enemy is politically conscious and always has been. And so, prisons, under a revolutionary society, I would say that should there be a civil war today, tomorrow, there's a revolution, people are rebuilding the society, Aztlan is independent, we have our new government, Republic of Aztlan in place, and we are running Aztlan. There's still going to be prisons. Don't get me wrong. There's still going to be prisons even after the revolution, because there's going to be so many counter revolutionaries, so many people that are on the side of the oppressor. It's like when slavery ended. Slavery ended, and the slaves were in the field, and they were talking, hey, we're free, we don't have to be slaves no more. And there was always a certain population of slaves that said, hey, Mazda's good, I'm not leaving Mazda. And they're like, hey, well, you could leave, you don't have to be here working under the lash. No. Mazda's good, he's a good Mazda. Mazda take care of us. And the slaves sometimes, fell in love with the slave master and love their master. And we see that here today when we see Chicano people who are loving the president. We see that when we see Chicano people putting on the police uniform, putting on the immigration uniform. We see this. So, this is something that we have to keep in mind, that we're always going to have counter revolutionaries. We're always going to have these people trying to overturn the gains of the revolution. So we're going to have prisons for some time after the revolution. We're also going to need prisons, and prisons and how we think of prisons are going to be different. They're not going to be ran the same. They're not going to look the same. They're going to be totally different. But we will have to have places to house people for re-education. We will have re-education centers. We will have to, because there's so many people that are brainwashed into believing that that this capitalism and this parasitical way of living and preying on others and profiting off others' labor and exploiting, they think that this is the way to go. So we have to re-educate them. So there's going to be a lot of people in prison after the revolution, and probably more than there is today. So that's something that we have to come to grips with as well. Is prisons ain't going to go away for any time soon. Eventually, hopefully, we're going to work to the point where we do have no more need for prisons. But in the short term, post revolution, we will have prisons, and we will be re-educating people. We will be re-educating the oppressor nation, that needs a lot of re-educating. And so we will be doing a lot of that, and the counter revolutionaries that will come out of the woodwork. But the prisons, if we look at prisons in other countries, let's say in revolutionary China, circa 1949, 1950, 1949 to, let's say, 1976, in Mao's China, we learned that the prisons there were actually, the guards weren't like the guards here. The prisoners actually loved the guards. They were from the people, from their community. They were their friends, family members, and they treated the prisoners very differently. One of the things about the prisons in revolutionary China is that they provided study groups every day. They provided the prisoners with revolutionary books, revolutionary literature, to learn their history, to learn the struggles of the working class people there. And if you look at prisons here, and I was in prison, and I know they don't even let us have study groups. Their study groups, they're underground study groups, because if they were to catch prisoners studying, reading and writing and answering questions about different things that they've learned in the study group, they would actually call it gang activity. Anytime prisoners come together to do anything in prison here in these false U.S. borders, it's called gang activity. So study groups are underground. And I've been in a lot of study groups in prisons, and I know that it's very dangerous. The state, the guards, the pigs, they look for anybody organizing on this level, and these are the people they pluck out, people that are running study groups, and put in the hole, send them to the control unit, send them to the shoes. They don't want people to learn. They don't want people to become politically conscious. They don't want that, because it threatens them. It threatens the state, threatens the status quo. It once prisoners are politically conscious, what happens? They stop bumping heads with each other, and they start focusing on the prison staff, the enemy, the state. And they don't like that. So they try to prevent that. Anybody that comes in that's teaching, that's disseminating literature, they slam them down, and they try to prevent that. So, even educating on that level, spreading literature, revolutionary reading material is dangerous, and so people do it on the unders. And, but in these prisons, we're forbidden to have many revolutionary books. For example, in California prisons and most of the U.S., the books of George Jackson are banned. You will go to the hole if you have George Jackson's books. Blood in My Eyes, Soledad Brother. These books, George Jackson was a revolutionary, black revolutionary in prison who wrote these books, and his books are banned. For example, the book Chicano Power and the Struggle for Aztlan. That book is banned in the entire state of Texas. It cannot enter any Texas prisons. It cannot. It's also banned in the state of Colorado. No prisons in Colorado can have the book. No prisoners, and they'll actually go to the hole if they have it. They say that it promotes the overthrow of the U.S. government. They also say that it is a threat to the safety and security of the institution. This is Chicano Power and the Struggle for Aztlan. This book, has been considered, a history book, a training guide, and a a book of revolutionary theory. It's like all in one. A very special book for those of you who haven't read it or obtained it. Check it out. Chicano Power and the Struggle for Aztlan. And so this is my point, is that this is how the U.S. Works in its prisons. This is the amount of repression that we face. And other countries did things differently. They actually didn't ban revolutionary books. They actually gave them to the prisoners. In revolutionary China, they organized, the prison itself organized study groups. They wanted people to become conscious and revolutionary and political. The U.S. does not, because to be revolutionary in the U.S. Is in opposition of the U.S., because the U.S. is an oppressor nation. So to understand that and to begin to learn and study, you're basically coming to realize that you are, living under an occupation. You're living under a colonized society, that the white oppressor nation, has, repressed and exploited your people for, hundreds of years. So to learn all this, you're naturally going to take steps. Once you're aware of it and conscious, you're going to take steps to overturn it, to transform it, to revolutionize it. And that's what they don't want. So this is something, when it comes to prisons, we have to understand what they're built for, why they're there, what happens within the prisons. And the thing about the people, and this is something that America and imperialism in general around the world, something they get wrong is they don't understand. And it doesn't matter how technologically advanced they are, it doesn't matter how wealthy the country. One of the things that these countries get wrong every time, these predator countries, oppressor nations, is that they don't grasp the strength of the people, the will to resist. And so the people find ways around the repression. In the prisoners, the prisoners will transform those prisons into liberation schools, into basically training camps of resistance for Aztlan. And I've seen it. I've seen the most, Pelican Bay Shoe, one of the highest security institutions in these false U.S. borders. Pelican Bay Shoe was transformed into into a training camp by politically conscious revolutionary prisoners. And this is where I became politically conscious in Pelican Bay Shoe. And it's crazy because they built this camp, this concentration camp, in order to confine people, to isolate the people, to break their will to resist, break them mentally. And yet, because of the study groups, the political study groups in there, I was able to not only survive that concentration camp, but also to rise above my conditions in there, and to learn and to become politically conscious, and to contribute to the movement outside of prisons, not just for Aztlan, but the social movement in general, the social movement for justice. So, and so this is something that they will always get wrong. That prisons, they put revolutionaries in prisons. We'll just transform those prisons into training camps, into political education, to cadre centers. And this is what we'll continue to do until the amount of prisoners leaving prisons is high enough to enter the barrios, enter the ghettos in the hoods, and to transform the hoods, the barrios, and the ghetto projects. And that's when they're going to have their hands full. That's when they're in trouble. So, they continue to push us into these prisons, and we continue to revolutionize these prisons. And that's what it's about. And so that's my take on prisons. They are concrete examples of national oppression here in the U.S. The death rows, majority of death rows in the U.S. are black folks, new Africans. The majority of concentration camp control units, the shoes, the solitary confinement units, at least in the U.S., are mostly Raza, Chicano people. So that's just what I got to say on that. And that's my take on prisons and why they exist, what they're used for, and what we can do to combat them in every way we can. And that's it. Remember to free Aztlan.